Welcome back to another edition of me reviewing things that I already reviewed, but we're going to review them again. Before we get started, I just wanted to send a really big thank you to everyone who watched and sent a lot of good vibes and messages, either directly on the video, which I always love because it helps with engagement, but also folks who just sent me personal messages. I know I got a little bit more emotional on that one, but also, you know, I am a human, right? I do have things that go on in my life. And yeah, I just want to be able to have those moments. We do the social commentary, we talk about the state of the game, but I also want to be able to be transparent and honest with you all as a content creator, as a human, as someone who's just trying to get through this thing called life, that we're able to, just have some good conversations, and I can share bits and pieces of my life along the way. So really appreciate folks for supporting that video. And if you haven't, go check it out. If you don't want to, that's fine as well. But let's go ahead and jump in. If you didn't already watch the first video that we did, I took a little bit more time with it. It's a little bit more in depth. We're not really going to go as in depth this time, because what we really wanted to do with the first video is because it was the first time ever being able to be introduced to this concept of guardian ranks, and then being able to get to the top rank at the time. Again, we don't know if Bungie's going to change this in the future, but the top rank as of last season was rank 11, as well as this season, rank 11. And so what we want to do is talk through a couple quick points about how we feel in comparison to the last video in terms of getting to rank 11 again, and what could possibly be improved for the system going forward. If you are someone who is potentially interested in grinding out getting to rank 11, I would say definitely watch the first video, but also come back and watch this review. If you are not interested in ranking up and not interested in guardian ranks in general, still watch a video, because I love hearing from y'all. But to kick us off, one of the first things that we talked about in the first video, and that I want to reflect on now, is the ease of use. When we're talking about the system as a whole, although I have a lot of feelings about the systems and I put out a lot of different videos, which you all know by now, but the reality is, giving Bungie credit where it's due, the system, even going back to re-rank up to rank 11, still felt pretty, I don't want to say easy, because I don't want to trivialize that some of the achievements that you have to do are difficult for some people, but what I will say is, for the most part, it's smooth. We'll say about 80% of the process, right? So knowing that we get reset back to rank 6, even if you've gotten to the top rank, which is rank 11, which we did last season, and then getting reset in this season back to rank 6. So we start off there, we're grinding out the regular seasonal content, and for the most part, y'all, I really didn't even notice it for the most part. Obviously, I was pretty hyper focused, maybe not obviously. If you're in my streams, you knew I was very hyper focused for those 2 weeks after the dungeon came out, to really try and press myself to get the solo flawless. It is one of the more challenging, it's not impossible, but it's one of the more challenging solo flawless attempts, and knowing that we had to grind out the activities to get more XP, to level up, to get my gear stronger, all that good stuff, I didn't even notice for the most part until like after I got the solo flawless clear, realizing that like I had already pretty easily gotten through, I want to say like rank 9 just by doing that stuff. Obviously, to get to rank 10 and higher, you need to do the master version of the dungeon, you need to do solo flawless, all that good stuff. So the point being, in terms of ease of use, I still have to give Bungie their props for the most part, at least 80%. Just being able to go back through the process wasn't that bad. Next up, let's talk about the difficulty level. Now, if we landed at somewhere around a 6 or so out of 10 for last season's rank up process in terms of difficulty of trying to get to that. Again, I know a number of people who made it to rank 10 or rank 11, folks who I would categorize as probably not really interested in these type of grind systems, or just things that you have to like knock out. They're more people who just like do your bounties, do weekly pinnacles, and get out. But even being able to see some of those folks in the community get to rank 10, get to rank 11, I think we could rank it as, and again, I want to be very clear, this is not a knock at any of those people or anybody who got to rank 11 last season, but just naming the fact that Spire of the Watcher, especially when it first came out, but then also because that was the main achievement you had to get through, was obviously the master version of Spire the Watcher, but then also doing it solo flawless. And Spire the Watcher, it's a bit of a time suck, but the whole mechanic is connect the dots and then do damage, right? So it's pretty fairly straightforward, and as long as you stay focused, pace yourself, play smart, and come into the dungeon with a pretty decent build, you're able to do that. Not saying that the dungeon itself is easy to solo flawless, because solo flawless is still a challenge, but saying that if you were to, and this is going to sound corny, but put your mind to it, for the most part you're going to be able to knock out with either a bonk titan build, the invis hunter build where you just kind of like spam tether and debuff grenades, obviously solar warlock, arc warlock, even before the recent seasonal changes. So there's a lot of builds that you could bring into the dungeon, right? So for that being part of the difficulty, solo flawless and then the master version of the dungeon. And then the other thing, again, to get you over that hill to rank 10 or rank 11 is doing the master version of the newest raid. Again, the newest raid is Root of Nightmares. Some may disagree, but if you're asking me, I think it's definitely harder than Master Vault of Glass, and I think it's pretty competitive when we're talking about Master of King's Fall. Even with that being said, I'd still rank it as a fairly achievable triumph to get, because ultimately, in my opinion, the most challenging room in that whole master version of the raid is still Nezarec, the final boss room. In terms of encounter 1, it's pretty easy enough to take care of the tormentors and the anti-barrier. Jumping puzzle, again, similar concept. If you have a decent ad clear build and you have good runners, you'll get through it. Again, all the way up to Nezarec itself is fairly easy to maintain if you're going with the LFG who's, in this case, you do need to use mic, you do need to use comms, but also if everyone has a fairly decent build, you're gonna go in there and do pretty well. The issue being, even myself, when I was LFGing to get my master version of Root of Nightmares done, did come with a challenge of doing Nezarec. The mechanics of Nezarec itself are not that difficult, even on master mode. The challenge comes down to really having folks who understand what ad clear is. I think, and this is maybe worth a video if you all wanted it, but ad clear is more than just like shooting a couple ads and hiding and being done with it. And again, not trying to trivialize anyone, but the whole thing is, I think so many people in the community think of ad clear as this kind of like turn your brain off role in a raid or a dungeon, but honestly, it's not. In general, it's just not, but especially not in the master version of Nezarec. You have to have your ad clear team ready to go. You have to have your gaze team on point. Like, there's no gaps. Like, again, the runners obviously have to be on point, but again, if the gaze team is not on their job, if ad clear is not adequately clearing out the middle section and the left and right sections as well, yeah, you're probably gonna wipe multiple times, and the group's gonna get frustrated, especially if you're not friends and you're just playing with random folks in LFG. People leave, like it just ends up becoming a hassle to get through, because I think a lot of people don't take it as seriously as they should. That said, Master Root of Nightmares to me is still very achievable, and even in the runs that I did via LFG, I want to say it wasn't too bad. I think my first ever clear was pretty rough, but I think after that, attempting Master Root of Nightmares should be pretty attainable for most folks, given the fact that if you actually have people equipped with solid builds, especially now with all of the boosts that we have to arc, there's really no reason why that room shouldn't be manageable for most teams, especially given the fact that Nezarec himself as the boss is still fairly squishy. So if you're coming in there with a div, Gallahorn rocket, and then everyone else has, maybe like a chill clip rocket, just like a solid setup, you're going to take care of Nezarec still fairly easily, even on master mode. Again, it comes down to managing the room and being able to take care of the ads. So again, that difficulty level, again, coming back to the core point, that 7.5 level of difficulty out of 10, to me, warrants that it's going to be a challenge for most folks, but also it's going to be still fairly achievable if you're with a group of folks who have comms, who are going to be patient, and adjust roles and builds to make sure that the team gets to the ultimate goal. So if you knocked out the master version of the raid last time, you're good to go for this season, because again, it's based on the most recent raid. That said, when we come to this season, season 21, I do think we have to bump up the difficulty level a little bit more because of the requirements to not only do solo flawless for the new dungeon, which is Goes to the Deep, but also doing it on master mode. Honestly, I don't want to take too much time going into a deep dive because one, I don't want to bore y'all, but also because I think it warrants its own video. But the whole process of trying to get solo flawless for Goes to the Deep was a very trying experience, especially as someone like myself who has a chronic illness, who is also neurodivergent. I have a lot of things going on, and obviously, everyone is living different lives. But not only is it such a time suck and such a commitment for you to be in that dungeon for as long as it takes most folks, but also it's just a simple fact that the bosses themselves have the shield mechanic unnecessarily makes the encounters for the two main bosses, again, Ekthar in encounter 2, and then the final boss, however you pronounce it, in the final boss room. I think it just makes it not only just unnecessarily long, but also just trivializes to me the overall mechanic of having to grab symbols, having to kill knights at the wrong spot. It's a pretty engaging mechanic if we're being honest. The issue only comes in when you're either trying this solo flawless or you're trying to do the new dungeon Goes to the Deep on master mode. When you're trying to accomplish these things, the frustration point that I have really comes from the fact that it requires a level of precision and execution at such a high level that you don't even have to have on Master Root of Nightmares. Again, what we just talked about, it being a higher difficulty level and there being some challenges there and having to manage ads in the room, you can get away with a lot, honestly, from Master Root of Nightmares in terms of deaths, in terms of scuff damage phases. There's a lot you can get away with in Master Root of Nightmares. In Ghost of the Deep Master version, as well as doing it solo flawless, there's literal 0.0000001% room for error. You have to hit your shots. You have to know every cadence of how the enemy spawns happen. You have to know what triggers what. And again, some people are going to be like, well, that's what just you have to do in those scenarios. But again, when we're talking about you have to have that high of a level of execution and precision on a dungeon, not a raid, again, it kind of goes into conversational points about Bungie and the decisions they're making. But to me, I do think we have to be honest about that difficulty level and raise the overall difficulty of getting to rank 11 this time around, given that the fact that in comparison to Master and solo flawless for Spire of the Watcher, it takes significantly more time and patience and energy to be able to complete those same versions, again, doing it solo flawless and Master version to be able to get to rank 10 and rank 11. It takes a lot more time to do that with Ghost of the Deep than it ever did with Spire of the Watcher. Even going back a couple different times to do different runs for solo flawless of Spire of the Watcher, I found myself having more fun and engaging because I'm testing out my skill, I'm trying out different builds and all this really cool engagement that I get to have with the game. In Ghost of the Deep, I got my one solo flawless clear and I am never touching that again. Absolutely, you can pay me. I mean, well, you probably could pay me, but it'd have to be an exorbitant amount of money. But I just can't ever see myself going back to it because it was so taxing on my brain. It was so taxing of experience. And also it just became boring at certain times where it's just like what would otherwise be a enjoyable, challenging experience of having to nail down the mechanic and have that precision level. It all feels trivialized that even if you do everything right, the bosses have so much health that you forget the symbol, your brain gets tired. Even people who aren't neurodivergent, people struggle with that aspect. Even now, the dungeon's been out for 4, 5, 6 weeks at this point, and there's people still trying to get their solo flaws clear. So knowing the fact that it just requires so much, and it's not even just because of a difficulty level, it's because of an endurance test. You're literally running a marathon based on the amount of health that the bosses have. And for me, it's artificial difficulty level. It's not enjoyable, but on the whole, it still is a barrier. It's a barrier to entry that's going to keep a lot of people away from getting to rank 10 or rank 11. And again, maybe that was Bungie's design this time around, but ultimately, I think if we're looking at last season as that difficulty of around a 6 out of 10, I think we do have to bump it up to a 7, 7.5, You know, again, just based on the difficulty of getting to those final ranks, rank 10 and 11. Which leads me to my last point. What gets you over the hill to finally complete rank 11 and go to the tower and get your reward? Well, you got it, folks. I'm here to complain once again about commendations. Now, before you click out the video and slam your computer against the wall, I'm not gonna rant about it. I've already have several rant videos about commendations. I'm not gonna go into too details about that because, again, if you wanna know my feelings, I have videos detailing that. But for me, the same issues that we talked about before are coming up here again. The fact that this whole system is built on you being able to earn things on your own merit and skill and test yourself and challenge yourself, but the one thing that keeps you back, or keeps most people back, even friends I've talked to, the one thing that continues to keep people back is not actually achieving some of these tasks. It's the fact that, like, you have to get these commendations. You have to get the leadership commendation. You have to get the ally commendation. You have to get these commendations. And the fact that there's this system that puts such a high, continues to put such a high value on commendations, this thing that is totally outside of your control, continues to blow my mind. Now, Bungie has doubled down on commendations in TWAB, or now TWID, this week in Destiny. A while ago now, I want to say it was a couple months ago, but again, they doubled down. They're like, essentially like, yeah, we're gonna keep commendations, we're just gonna lower the amount. And for me, if that's their stance, if they really have no interest in hearing my voice or other voice who have talked about this unnecessary tie of commendations to Guardian ranks, if they're just like, we're keeping it in there, yeah, that's their choice. I can't change that. But what I would advocate for, if that's their stance, would be to at least lower it some more, and then also make it cumulative over time. In my mind, if I'm getting commendations, why is it that I'm at 2,000 plus commendations? In all other scenarios, I would have met the requirements for the ally commendations, leadership, all the things that I'm being asked of. Normally, it wouldn't be an issue if it was collecting over time. But the fact that every time I rank up, I'm only getting a percentage of the commendations that I've gotten, and then I just have to re-grind. And so it's this not only unnecessary time suck, but it's this unnecessary mechanic from Bungie to squeeze every living ounce of player time out of players. And for me, it's such a turnoff. Again, there's some people that we said at the beginning of the video who are just not going to engage, and they don't have this frustration or stress. But I think people who are trying to push themselves, people who are like, hey, I don't want to be at level 6 forever, I want to try some of these things, I want to try and master a lost sector, I want to do some of the other things to get myself higher, not only to challenge myself, but to grind out and get some additional XP. The fact is, commendations continue to be a burden, not an addition to this process. Being forced to grind out commendations teaches you nothing. You get zero skill out of that. You get zero benefit. Like, again, in the comment section, let me know if you're finding a skill out of it. But for me, the fact that that part is completely, one, out of your control, and two, you're not gaining anything as a player. I think those are two key metrics that Bungie honestly should relook into and really reevaluate about how it's a drain on players' time. And I think ultimately, especially in the current state of the game, I think it's one of those things that just like takes morale, even more morale, away from the community when we're in a space where we're being asked do something that literally has no benefit, doesn't improve our gameplay, doesn't improve anything about our engagement with the game. It's just something that's like, hey, can you coerce people into sending you commendations? Which to me, I'm not a dev, but it feels like bad game design as a consumer of this product. I just feel like it's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of my community's time. Again, you know, the whole community, Destiny 2 community's time, to put these things in that way in the game, when you could either, one, what I advocate for, just take them completely out, or two, what I think is probably more reasonable and something that maybe Bungie does in like 16 years from now, but where you actually make it cumulative over time. That way you're respecting the player's time, you're respecting the engagement that they're doing with the game, and you're allowing them to focus more on the things like doing the new dungeon solo flawless, like doing master lost sector flawless, like doing those other achievements that actually test their knowledge and skill in the game. All in all, looking at the ease of use, looking at the difficulty changes that shifted from the last season, I would have to say if last season, the first time we ever had Guardian ranks, getting up to rank 11 was probably a 6 out of 10 difficulty. Not too hard, not too easy. I think now it's shifted over to the more difficult part because we do have a dungeon that is holding a lot of players back from being able to achieve, and so knowing that there's that higher barrier of entry as well as the continued issue of commendations, something that's completely out of the player's control being tied to their success to get to the top Guardian rank, I think we have to move it up to a 7.5 if not 8 out of 10. It does feel admittedly a little bad even giving it this rank of like 8 out of 10 of difficulty because a lot of the difficulty feels artificial. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like there's anything that's actually more challenging, that's actually boosting the player's knowledge in the game or skill in the game. But knowing how Bungie is moving in its current status and the way that they are approaching the game and the community, I don't see a reality where we're gonna get away from this trend. We'll see where future seasons take us and see if they adjust anything, but I think for now we're moving more and more of a direction where Bungie is going to position the triumphs that you need in the Guardian rank system as more of a drain on players' time than actual what they endeavored to do, which was a test of players' skill and knowledge of the game. The state of Destiny right now is not in its best place, and again, Guardian ranks could have been a great opportunity to really lean into opportunities for folks to test their skill and build more community and knowledge around the game, but instead it feels like Bungie continues to opt in heavier and heavier, deeper and deeper into just how much time can we get out of players. And again, it's their game. They do what they want, that's their prerogative, but ultimately I think if you're talking about recommendations for doing this system, especially this season, if not going forward, I'd say it's a pretty hard no. I don't believe the actual value to increasing your skill and knowledge of the game is there, and also I just don't think it values and respects your time. So I suffer through it so you don't have to. But let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you think I'm totally off base and this is the best system in the world. Maybe you agree that this is a pretty challenging endeavor. Let me know. Again, this is just my perspective as someone who's gotten to rank 11 in the first season that was ever available, and now in the second season that's ever available. Doing it again feels a little bit lackluster. It doesn't really hit the way I think it's supposed to hit, and I think we've given the system a fair chance, and I think now is the moment or moments for Bungie to go ahead and make some shifts to make it better. Because otherwise, I think it's just going to be one of those things that was a nice idea when they had it, but execution wasn't quite there. Anyways, looking forward to seeing y'all star side as well as in the comment section. Peace.